The day Harlan Voss walked into Nora Whitfield's office, he brought nothing but a handshake, a business card, and the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been told no. Nora, no, scratch that. The woman sitting behind that desk wasn't thinking about Harlan Voss yet. She was thinking about her daughter's school play, which she had already missed twice, and the permission slips still sitting on her kitchen counter at home, unsigned. Corinne Merritt had been running Merritt Woodcraft out of a converted barn in Carver, Tennessee for 11 years. The barn had bad insulation, a roof that leaked in 3 places, and a hand-painted sign out front that her late husband Dale had done himself with leftover deck paint and a 2-inch brush. She hadn't replaced the sign. She wasn't going to. The shop made custom cabinetry mostly, some furniture. A few restoration jobs on antique pieces for collectors who drove down from Nashville and acted surprised that the work was this good coming out of a place that looked like this. Corinne had stopped being offended by that a long time ago. She let the work speak. The work always spoke. She had one full-time employee, a man named Burl who had worked with Dale before the accident and stayed on after without being asked, and a part-timer named Jasper who came in 3 days a week and was saving up for community college. She had a 9-year-old daughter named Penny who did her homework at the workbench every afternoon and had learned to identify wood grain by touch before she could multiply fractions, and she had about 6 weeks of runway left before the bank called the line of credit. That was the part nobody could see when they walked in. The shop looked fine. The shop smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, and looked the way people who bought expensive things like craft shops to look, a little rough, very real, deeply authentic. But the books told a different story. 3 big commercial clients had gone quiet in the past year. One had folded entirely. One had moved production overseas. The third, a regional restaurant chain, had called Corinne personally to apologize and tell her they were taking cabinet work in-house. She hadn't slept well in 4 months. That was where things stood on the Tuesday morning when the Harlan Voss situation began. Harlan ran a company called Voss Contract Solutions, which was the kind of name that explained everything and nothing simultaneously. The company brokered commercial interiors work, connecting manufacturers and craftspeople with developers, hotel chains, corporate campuses. It was a middleman business dressed up with a nice website and a Scottsdale address, and Harlan had built it from nothing over about 15 years by knowing exactly 2 things: who needed what and who could make it. He was 41. Divorced, no kids, drove a truck that cost more than some houses in the county he was currently driving through, and had the kind of phone that buzzed every 8 minutes without fail. He had been referred to Corinne Merritt's shop by a subcontractor in Chattanooga who owed him a favor. What Harlan needed, or rather what his current client needed, was someone who could fulfill a specialty millwork contract, 48 custom credenzas and a matching wall panel system for a law firm renovation in downtown Atlanta. The original fabricator had defaulted. The timeline was brutal, and the specs required hand joinery details that most commercial shops would outsource or fake. Harlan's assistant had done the initial search. 3 shops came up, 2 were too large, and 2 booked. The third was Merritt Woodcraft in Carver, Tennessee, which had a website that looked like it was built in 2009 and a phone number that rang 4 times before someone answered. That someone was Penny, who had picked up her mother's cell phone off the workbench because it was ringing, and her mother was running the router. Harlan Voss had a conversation with a 9-year-old about cabinet joinery before he realized the situation. He called back on the shop line. Corinne answered. She almost said no, not because she couldn't do the work. She could. She knew it as soon as she heard the specs. It was hard, it was detailed. It was exactly the kind of thing the shop did well. But the scale was different. 48 units in 11 weeks meant bringing in help, ordering materials she didn't have on hand, running the shop 7 days a week for most of that stretch. It meant betting the last of her operating cash on a contract with a company she had never heard of, brokered by a man she'd never met, for a client in Atlanta whose name she'd have to look up. She had Burl price it out over lunch. She had Jasper pull comps online that afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table after Penny was asleep and ran the numbers herself 3 times, with a yellow legal pad and a calculator the way her father had taught her. The margin was real. It wasn't spectacular, but it was real, and if the payment schedule held, it would get her through the next 8 months and give her room to pursue 2 other prospects she'd been slow-walking because she couldn't afford to staff up. She called Harland back the next morning and said yes. Then she called the bank and arranged a small bridge loan to cover materials because the deposit Harland offered wouldn't arrive for 10 days and she needed to order lumber that week. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, the first delivery was in the yard. Harland didn't think about Corinne Merritt much in those early weeks. He had 7 other projects running simultaneously, a contract dispute with a flooring vendor in Phoenix and a new proposal to finish for a hotel group in Charlotte. He received the signed paperwork, forwarded the deposit, noted the delivery confirmation, and moved on. His job at this stage was to not need to think about the fabricator. If he was thinking about the fabricator, something was going wrong. He thought about a lot of things that October. He thought about his quarterly numbers, which were soft. He thought about the Charlotte hotel deal, which was stalling. He thought about a message from his ex-wife asking if he'd remembered his nephew's birthday. He had not, and another from his business partner asking about the Q4 forecast. He did not think about the woman in Carver, Tennessee who was running her shop 11 hours a day and had rescheduled Penny's orthodontist appointment twice to make sure the router times stayed on schedule. He did not think about Burl showing up 40 minutes early every morning without being asked, because Burl had figured out what this contract meant. He did not think about Jasper, who had pushed back community college by a semester when Corinne quietly offered him full-time hours through the end of the year and he could see she needed the help. In the way of people who broker things, Harland Voss had learned to see projects as problems to be routed, not labors to be done. This was not cruelty. It was just distance. The first problem came in week 4. The lumber supplier shorted a panel order, wrong thickness on 12 sheets of walnut veneer that were supposed to match existing millwork in the law firm's conference room. It was a vendor error, not Corinne's, but the result was the same. 3 days lost while she sourced a replacement, paid a premium she hadn't budgeted for, and stayed up until 2 in the morning repricing the schedule to see if she could still make the deadline. She could. Barely. She sent Harland a brief email flagging the delay in the replacement cost, asked him to pass it to the client as a vendor issue, and got back to work. Harland read the email on his phone in an airport in Charlotte. He forwarded it to his client contact with a note that said, "My material delay, not on our end, back on track." He got a terse reply. He made a note to follow up with Corinne about the schedule. He forgot to follow up. The second problem came in week 7, and it was more serious. The law firm's architect emailed revised specs, not major changes, but real ones. The depth on 8 of the credenzas needed to go from 24 inches to 26 to accommodate a new AV system the client had decided to add. The architect framed it as a small adjustment. Harland forwarded the email to Corinne without comment. She called him within the hour. "This isn't a small adjustment," she said. Not upset, not accusatory. Just factual. 8 units at 26 deep means different drawer hardware, different back panel specs, and 3 days of rework on pieces we've already started. I need to know who's paying for the change order. Harland said he would get back to her. He did not get back to her for 4 days. When he did, it was to tell her the client was disputing the change order amount, and could she find a way to absorb some of it on her end. There was a silence on the line that lasted about 5 seconds. "I have a daughter," Corinne said finally. "I don't say that to get sympathy. I say it because it's the reason I cannot afford to eat a change order that isn't mine. The numbers I gave you were the numbers. If the client changed the specs, the client pays the difference." Harland said he understood. He said he'd push back harder. He did. Eventually, the change order was approved at 70% of what Corinne had asked. She made it work. She did not complain about the 30%. But she didn't forget it either. Week 9 was when things cracked open between them, without either of them planning it. Harland drove down to Carver to do a site visit. His client contact in Atlanta had started asking for progress photos, which Harland didn't have because he'd never thought to ask for them, which made him realize he'd been managing this contract at arm's length longer than was probably wise. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Corinne was in the shop. The first thing he noticed was that it looked exactly the way it had looked in the photos on the website. Old barn, dented metal roof, hand-painted sign, and the second thing he noticed was that it was loud in there, a good kind of loud, the kind that means machines are running and work is happening. Burl let him in. Penny was at the back workbench doing homework, headphones on, entirely unbothered by the noise. She looked up, assessed him with the frank curiosity of a 9-year-old, and went back to her worksheet. Corinne came out from the finishing room wiping her hands on a shop rag. She had sawdust in her hair. She shook his hand and took him on a walkthrough of the completed units. There were 31 of them done, lined up along the side wall, staged for delivery, each one wrapped in moving blankets. The wall panel system was laid out in sections on sawhorses, waiting for final trim work. Harlan stopped in front of the third credenza in the row and crouched down to look at the joinery on the corner. He stayed there for a moment longer than he'd planned. "This is hand-cut," he said. "It's in the spec. Nobody does hand-cut anymore. Not on commercial work." Corinne shrugged. "We do." Harlan stood up and looked at her. For a moment he didn't say anything professional or broker appropriate. He just said, "How long have you been running this place?" 11 years. Since Dale passed. By yourself with help." He looked around the shop, at Burl running the table saw, at Jasper fitting a panel, at Penny at the workbench, pencil moving steadily across the page. "I should have come sooner," he said. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something. Corinne said, "Walkthrough's not over," and kept moving. They finished the contract on time. 48 credenzas and the full wall panel system, delivered to the Atlanta job site in 2 loads across back-to-back Saturdays. Corinne drove the second truck herself, with Burl riding shotgun and Penny asleep across the back seat. The installation crew in Atlanta kept stopping to look at the joinery. The lead installer, a man named Fitch who'd been doing commercial work for 20 years, pulled Corinne aside on the loading dock and said, "Who made these?" "I did," she said. "My shop. You're not from a big house." "No, you should be charging more," he said. Corinne thanked him and went to help Burl with the second pallet. Harlan sent the final payment on the 45th day of the net 45 terms. Not a day early, not a day late. Exactly on time, which in the world of contract work was better than most. He also sent a short email. It said, "The client is happy. The architect asked for the fabricator's contact information. I gave them yours. I should have come down to see the works sooner. That was my error." Corinne read the email at the kitchen table after Penny was in bed. She read it twice, then she set her phone down and sat with it for a minute. She did not reply that night. The architect's call came 6 weeks later. Her name was Nadia Forsyth, and she was one of 3 principals at a firm in Atlanta that specialized in high-end commercial and hospitality interiors. She had looked at the credenzas every day for the past month and had finally called the fabricator. She asked if Corinne could do a full hotel lobby build-out. Custom reception desk, display millwork, decorative wall paneling, 12 custom benches, a boutique property in Savannah scheduled to open in 14 months. The budget was real. The timeline was tight but workable. Corinne asked for a week to assess it. She called Harlan, not because she needed to. He wasn't involved in this one. Nadia had come directly to her. But she called him anyway because he was the reason Nadia had her number, and because in 11 years of running this shop alone, she had learned that pride was expensive and advice was free. She told him what the project was. She told him the budget. She told him thinking about bringing on a second full-time hand and getting a proper delivery vehicle rather than renting. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you have someone in mind?" "Jasper's full-time now," Harlan said. "Worked with a cabinet shop that closed last year. I can make a call. I don't need you to make a call." "I know you don't," he said. "I'm offering because I want to, not because you can't." Another one of those small silences. "Fine," Corinne said. "Make the call." The guy from Knoxville was named Bo Stanton, and he was, as Harlan had said, very good. He came on. By February, the shop was running 4 people on the hotel project, and Corinne had moved the financials from the yellow legal pad to actual software which Jasper set up and Burl refused to use on principle. Penny turned 10 in March. Corinne got her a woodworking kit, real tools, child-sized, not toys, and a book about furniture design that Penny carried around 2 months, annotating with a green marker. Harlan came down again in April, not for a site visit, just to see the shop. He brought barbecue from a place in Chattanooga he'd been told was worth the stop, and they ate it at the workbench with Burl and Jasper and Bo, and Penny narrated the hotel project from memory, including specs she definitely shouldn't have known but did because she'd been listening to her mother on the phone every night for 4 months. "She's going to run this place someday," Harlan said afterward, outside by the truck. "She's going to run something," Corinne said. "I haven't decided if I want it to be this." "What do you mean?" Corinne looked at the shop, at the hand-painted sign, at the roof that still leaked in 3 places but which Burl had patched with flashing tape last fall and which held now. "I want her to choose it," she said, "not just inherit it. I want her to see the whole world and then decide to come back here if she wants to." "That's different." Harlan thought about that. "That's a good way to think about it," he said. The hotel project finished in September. The opening was in October, and Nadia Forsyth sent a photo of the lobby to Corinne on the day the property went live. The light was coming through the windows at an angle that hit the reception desk just right, and the grain pattern Corinne had specified for the front panels caught it in a way that made the whole thing look like it was glowing from inside. Corinne showed the photo to Penny. Penny studied it for a long time. Then she said, "The bench legs are a little heavy for the space." Corinne laughed out loud. It was Harlan who told her about a month after the hotel opened that Nadia's firm had received an inquiry from a resort developer in South Carolina who had seen the Savannah property and wanted to know who did the millwork. "That's 3 properties," Harlan said on the phone. "Potentially. If you want them, can I do 3 properties?" "You can, if you're willing to grow the shop." "I'm always willing to grow the shop," Corinne said. "I just need to know the ground is solid before I step on it." "The ground is solid," he said. She paused. "Are you speaking as a broker or as something else?" There was a longer pause on his end this time. "Honestly," he said, "I'm not sure anymore. I think maybe I've stopped being able to tell." Corinne was quiet. Outside the shop window, Penny was helping Beau move a panel into position, directing him with hand signals she'd invented herself and that Beau had learned without comment over the past 9 months. "Let me think about the South Carolina project," Corinne said. "And then let me think about the other thing." "That's fair," Harlan said. She took the South Carolina project. She thought about the other thing. There is a version of this story where the woman in the barn loses everything before she gets anything back. There is a version where the numbers don't work out, where the bridge loan doesn't cover, where the change order fight kills the relationship before it can become anything. There is a version where Corinne Merritt shakes Harlan Voss's hand at the end of the Atlanta delivery, and that's the last they speak. None of those versions are this one. This one is the version where she stayed, where she called back, where she ran the numbers on the yellow legal pad and decided the risk was survivable, where she told a man on a phone that she had a daughter, and that was the reason, not the excuse but the actual reason, and where he finally heard it. The shop still has the hand-painted sign. Burl has been saying for 2 years that he'll repaint it properly, but Corinne keeps telling him to leave it. It looked the way Dale left it. That's how she wanted it. Penny is 11 now, and she can identify walnut, white oak, cherry, maple, and hickory by grain pattern alone. She has opinions about joinery that she will share whether asked or not. She has decided provisionally that she wants to study architecture but keep her hands in wood, which Corinne told her was not an either-or. The shop is running 4 people full-time now. There is a proper delivery vehicle, a second-hand cargo van Beau, found in Knoxville and Burl, kept complaining about until he drove it once and then refused to let anyone else parallel park it. The roof was replaced in October, fully. It was the first major capital expenditure Corinne had made in 6 years, and she stood in the yard and watched the crew take off the old metal panels one by one and did not cry, but came close. Some things you fix because they're broken, and some things you fix because you finally can. That is what this story is about in the end. Not the contract, not the money, not the credenzas lined up against the wall that a man in a truck crouched down to look at on a Wednesday afternoon. It's about the difference between barely and enough, and how thin that line actually is, and how many people are standing on the wrong side of it through no fault of their own except that no one came down to see the work. Penny will not remember a time before the shop was doing well. That is exactly how Corinne planned it. She made sure of that.